Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about visual reads and PET scan processes. So you're going to be hearing in a little bit from Drs. Gil Rabinovici and David Soleimani-Maguni. But first, we're going to get started with some intros and study updates. Next slide, please. All right, we'll be covering MRI memo. So we're going to be hearing from the disclosure team, going over protocol version 3 changes, as well as consent template changes, site initiation visit, leaderboard, handbook, and then announcing our CLARiTI office hours that will be starting tomorrow. Next slide, please. Handing it off to you, Sterling.
Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. We're excited to announce that the first participant for CLARiTI, the first visit of that first participant, has finally happened, and we're excited about that. That was a NAV 4694 amyloid scan. This was an African-American participant who has been in our ADRC for about 6 years, and she was just thrilled to be the first participant in CLARiTI. And just wanted to share the great news with you all that we're rolling. Let's go to the next slide. The next thing I wanted to mention is this MRI memo that we sent around. And it may seem complex, but it's basically the same kind of expectation that we already have with SCAN. We know that the T1 volume and the flare are the core sequences of SCAN MRI. That's going to be the same for CLARiTI. And then, as with SCAN, we have options what to do next. You can use the remaining MRI time with the other SCAN sequences, which is great. You can do some of your local sequences if that's what is a priority for your center. We also have our own small menu of advanced sequences. We're calling it CLARiTI Advanced, and you can choose from that as well. And as your site is deciding what to do with MRI and how you want to prioritize, we would just appreciate that opportunity to talk with you about that and get a sense of what your priorities are and what you'd like to do. In addition to the SCAN T1 volume and the flare, which will actually have a CLARiTI label or in the series description. The other sequence that we are strongly encouraging is the susceptibility weighted image for microbleeds. And that is a 2-for-1 sequence that gives you susceptibility weighted imaging, microbleed mapping, as well as quantitative susceptibility mapping, QSM, which has been shown by Kajal Kantarsi and others to be perhaps a signal that that might lead us towards a different pathology. QSM signal or lack thereof in the substantia nigra, for example, suggests that there may be an alpha-synuclein process in play. Anyway, the more of those details are on the memo. We encourage you to read that and reach out with any questions you have. Let's go on to the next slide, and let me turn it over to Annalise.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Just a very brief announcement. Previously, we've been referring to the disclosure core, which is the core that helps support all the sites in determining what results they want to return and how to do that. Consistent with kind of a culture change, we are changing our name to the Return of Results, or ROR core, lovingly known as. In part, this is because, we really want to be part of this culture of thinking about returning results as honoring our participants, honoring the contributions that they've made, and really acknowledging that the data are theirs, not ours. Whereas disclosure has a bit of a connotation of something that we're withholding and choosing to share selectively. So just a very quick announcement that if you see updated terminology around return of results instead of disclosure, that is why. And please be patient with us as we go through that transition in all of our language. Thanks.
All right, so moving on to some updates, we have recently submitted a protocol change. So we're now going to be on version 3. So we will announce that as soon as that's approved with WCG. And then with that protocol change, we also will have a change in our consent templates. So a couple things that we just wanted to point out here. We are changing the age of eligibility to age 50 and older for all participants, regardless of their cognitive status. We're modifying the process for return of results a little bit, and I'll get to that when we talk about the consent templates. And then just some other smaller revisions for readability and consistency. As far as the consent template changes, so we currently have 3 consent templates. So we are going to be removing the separate disclosure consent altogether. So we are going to be moving forward with 2 consent form options. So number 1, we have the CLARiTI consent, and then number 2, we'll have the CLARiTI consent with the option for return of results. So if your site will be sharing PET results, and the process will be the same for both impaired and unimpaired participants. If your site shares PET results with all participants, you will only need the consent with return of results. So if your site does not share PET results, you have the option to only use the one consent, the CLARiTI consent. And then just as a reminder to all sites, your language can be modified in the consent forms to align with your site-specific needs. So WCG may require a certain letter that's signed by Sterling as the sponsor, approving that some of that language can be changed. But all those changes, for the most part, should be easy to make. Next slide, please. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit about the site initiation visit. So all sites that are participating in CLARiTI will need to go through a site initiation visit with our UW-Madison Central Monitoring Service. So this will be the service that will be monitoring your study activities. You must have WCG IRB approval before we can schedule that site initiation visit. And then the expectation is that your regulatory documents and your regulatory binder would be complete by the time that you have that site initiation visit. We've got a lot of sites to get through, as you can imagine. The Central Monitoring Service is providing us with 2 site initiation visit dates per month, and they're allowing us to have 3 sites at each of those meetings. So that's 6 sites per month. So we just want to have all sites keep this in mind. This is something that is required, and it is a 5-hour training. Next slide, please. All right, so the staff members that will need to be included, so in addition to the site PI, we'll need the study coordinator, regulatory coordinator, and the outreach specialist, and they would really only need to be there for their portion of the site initiation visit. Somebody like a the study coordinator would need to be there, throughout the entire site initiation visit. But that's going to be covering the protocol review with Sterling. The regulatory overview, subject and data management, the monitor themselves will be presenting, just going over expectations. And then there will be a regulatory file review of your regulatory binder on a separate day. And then a short PI debrief meeting, just going over your regulatory binder, if there was anything missing, that kind of thing. That's usually pretty brief. And then on the right here, you can see the current scheduled site initiation visits. So we do have 1 opening at the end of September. We have yet to fill our October dates, and then we have 2 more for the end of October. So we'll release the dates as the November and December dates become available. Next slide, please. All right, and then I just wanted to point out the study startup dashboard. Let's see, can somebody put the link in the chat? It looks like it got cut off from my slide here. So just want all sites to go ahead and bookmark this study startup leaderboard. So there we go, thank you. Thanks to the NACC team for creating this dashboard for us. So your project coordinators, Kelsey and Hunja, as long as our regulatory team, Brittany and Mabel, are working on the back end to update this dashboard as they're working with the study sites. So this is something, this leaderboard here is available to everyone participating in CLARiTI. So you can kind of see, you can get a snapshot of where you are in relation to other sites. Next slide, please. All right, and then the study handbook. So be on the lookout for the study handbook. We will be releasing this next month, probably within the next 2 weeks or so. Next slide, please. All right, and then this was the CLARiTI office hours. This was announced in the last CLARiTI Connect. So the CLARiTI office hours, this is going to be the CLARiTI admin team as well as some representatives from the NACC team. Very informal meeting, just an opportunity for you to meet with some of us, get some of your questions answered. You do not need to register. You can, ask questions by raising your hand or by, putting something in the chat. Again, this is meant to be very informal, to go over the site readiness checklist and just making sure that study teams feel supported. So you can, if you're not available to join, that's fine. They will not be recorded, but you can always reach out to your CLARiTI project coordinator as well as our regulatory team to get any of your questions answered. All right, next slide, please. All right, I will pass it off to Heather, the program manager for CLARiTI at NACC.
Hi everyone, Heather O'Connell here from NACC. So I'm here today to share with you an important update regarding the CLARiTI subaward process. So following the release of the CLARiTI Year 2 Notice of Award, hooray, thank you NIA, the CLARiTI leadership team has decided to cease processing the ADRC site subawards for Year 1 of the grant period and move directly into Year 2 grant period, which starts September 1st, 2024. So as a result, the first ADRC subawards will now have a start date of September 1st, and the full budget period would be September 1st, 2024 through August 31st, 2025. So this is a change of what we've previously communicated. Importantly, budget assumptions that have been submitted and in our review currently will remain the same, just that the budget period is now shifted. So thank you to all the sites who have submitted your documentation. Moving forward, the required documentation that we're going to be looking for is the letter of intent and the CLARiTI letter. In terms of the letter of intent, sites that have already submitted will likely not need to resubmit that letter. We're reviewing each submitted document individually to make that determination, and we'll reach out if we need any changes to that. But for those sites that have not yet submitted, we still need to collect those and make sure that they're addressed to the University of Washington. For the CLARiTI approval letter, we still need to collect that, but know that this will not hold up your subaward processing. It is required to be collected for site activation as well as for your first payment. So the earlier that you submit it, the easier it is for us to process it. So please just send those along as soon as you have it. You may be wondering what this means in terms of timeline. So can you move to the next slide, please? Here's the updated timeline. Documentation collection is underway, of course. So we'll be reviewing all documentation over the next few weeks and reach out with any questions. Your ADRC site's Office of Sponsored Research should be receiving the draft sub-award from NACC and the University of Washington in the mid-October timeframe, and we anticipate that processing to take about 6 weeks. So looking for those fully executed sub-awards to happen towards the end of November, beginning of December timeframe. Finally, we'll be following up this webinar with an email communication directed to your ADRC administrators, site PIs, and grants and finance contacts to kind of put all of what I've just shared here in writing for those of you that may have missed the webinar, and happy to answer any questions that you have now in the Q&A, as well as in those office hours that Aaron just spoke about. So I think I'm going to hand it back to Dr. Mormino, who is going to introduce the Visual Reads team.
Thanks, Heather. So yeah, it's my pleasure today to introduce folks representing the Visual Reads team within CLARiTI. So today we're going to be hearing from Gil Rabinovici, who's a professor at UCSF. He directs the UCSF ADRC, is an MPI of CLARiTI, and also leads the visual core team within CLARiTI. We're also going to hear from Dr. David Solmane, who's an assistant professor at UCSF and a co-investigator within the Visual Reads core within CLARiTI. So yeah, take it away.
Thank you so much, Beth. It's really a pleasure to be joining you today and to be part of this project. So as Sterling and Beth were planning CLARiTI, I think there was a real growing consensus among all the people involved that we would very much want to return results to participants if the sites were interested and the participants were interested. And this is the PET scan reads is something that we actually initially piloted in the LEAD study, the longitudinal early onset Alzheimer's disease study, and now are doing an ADNI as well. And CLARiTI, I think, is breaking new ground in this, as we'll discuss. So I'll introduce things, and then actually David will take you through the meat of the project, which is of the presentation, which is to show you how the sausage is made, what we're doing with the scans, how we're interpreting them, and what kind of results you'll get back to the sites, ultimately to return to the participants. Next slide, please. This is just an outline of our agenda. So we'll introduce the team, go through the data flow, explain the visual read process, show you what the case report form that the readers are completing looks like, what information you'll get back at the sites, and then we'll preview the next ground that we hope to break, which is to interpret and return results of tau PET scans. Next slide. So this is the team. On the left, you see the team of visual readers. This is a multidisciplinary, multi-site team representing multiple ADRCs. It includes radiologists, nuclear medicine experts, neurologists, some people board certified in multiple of these specialties. If you are interested in being a reader or have nominees in your ADRC who may be interested in being readers, please go ahead and email those names to us. I'm sure we'll need to add to this team as the scans start to come in and the workflow increases. And on the right, you see the team of researchers at UCSF led by Dr. Renaud Lajoie, Dr. Anna Blazhnetz, Carol Suppy, and Zoe Lin, who are working tirelessly to make this process as seamless as possible for our readers and for our sites. Next slide. So we thought we would actually show you the little journey that the amyloid PET scan makes from your site all the way to the visual read team and to completion of the results. So the first step, which is critical, is that the site upload the image to LONI. Without you uploading the image to LONI, we can't really trigger the rest of the process. And sometimes sites are asking about their results, and it turns out the scans weren't uploaded to begin with. So this really starts the clock and starts the whole journey of the PET scan. So from LONI, the PET scan then travels to Bob Kepi's team at the University of Michigan for quality control and pre-processing. Bob returns those pre-processed images to LONI, and from there they make the trip down to Bill Jagus' team at UC Berkeley, or I should say up the California coast to UC Berkeley, where Bill's scan team is doing the same sort of processing of scans that they're doing for the SCAN project. From there, the scans are uploaded back to LONI. These include now fully pre-processed scans as well as MRI-free centiloid quantitation of the scans, which is part of the read, as David will describe. And this is really where our team at UCSF picks up the scans from LONI through NACC and through a data platform called Flywheel. This is where our readers download the scans or review the scans on Flywheel, complete the visual read electronic report form to tell you what the results are. And then from there, those results travel back to your site and you can disclose them to the participants. So this is what the entire journey looks like. It looks very complicated, multiple stops, but hopefully this leverages the SCAN data pipeline and also will get you the results that you need. Currently, we're committed to giving you results within 90 days of when the scan is uploaded. Hopefully, we can do it on an even tighter timeline, but just as we're sort of testing the process, 90 days is what you can expect. And at this point, I'll turn things over to David to explain more about the clinical read process. David, take it away.
Thank you, Gil. So I want to start by talking about our amyloid PET visual read process. And before we dive into that workflow in our process, I want to give everyone some background. So as you know, clinical assessment of amyloid PET primarily relies on visual reads. And in the US, visual read only is approved for determining amyloid PET status. However, quantitative information can be obtained from amyloid PET scans and used as an adjunct to visual assessment. The amyloid method is a widely used and accepted technique that provides a standardized quantitative measure of amyloid PET tracer uptake. And on this amyloid scale, 0 amyloids represents mean uptake in young adults devoid of amyloid, and 100 amyloids corresponds to the mean uptake in patients with mild Alzheimer's disease dementia. Quantitative thresholds used to discriminate between non-elevated and elevated scans typically fall in the 10 to 40 amyloid range. For example, in ADNI, florbetaben amyloid PET scans above 18 amyloids and florbetapir scans above 20 amyloids are considered elevated or positive by quantitation. Importantly, in our experience performing visual reads for various multi-center studies, we find that combining the amyloid PET visual read and quantitation provides complementary information that improves the quality and accuracy of the amyloid status determination. Next slide. 4 amyloid PET radio tracers are available in CLARiTI, including 2 FDA-approved tracers, florbetapir and florbetaben, the prototypical amyloid PET tracer, Pittsburgh Compound B or PIB, and another tracer commonly used in research called flutofuranol, also known as NAV4694. Sites will be able to use one of these 4 amyloid PET tracers. Despite slight differences in the visual interpretation of these tracers, non-elevated and elevated patterns tend to be consistent overall. So in a non-elevated or negative scan, binding is restricted to white matter, showing a preserved gray-white contrast, which is also described as a white matter skeleton pattern or the tree and winter pattern. Conversely, in an elevated or positive scan, cortical gray matter binding is equal to or greater than white matter binding with loss of gray-white matter contrast, which is described as a tree and bloom pattern. Next slide. In CLARiTI, we'll perform amyloid PET visual reads that incorporate amyloid quantitation. First, the reader will perform a blinded and independent visual read following tracer-specific criteria. So in the case of florbetapir and florbetaben, the tracer-specific FDA-approved visual read methods will be used. After documenting the visual read, they're presented with the amyloid quantitation for the scan, which will need to be interpreted in the context of appropriate thresholds. If the visual read and the quantitation are concordant, then a final non-elevated or elevated scan interpretation is assigned. However, if the visual read and quantitation are discordant, then consensus visual interpretation by 3 or more expert readers is triggered to assign the final non-elevated or elevated scan interpretation. The original reader can also trigger this process if the visual read and quantitation are concordant, but the visual read and or the quantitation are borderline, or if there are any other reasons that make the scan challenging to interpret. Next slide. In the Rabinovici lab, we apply this method combining visual read and quantitation in various multi-center studies, including ADNI-4 and LEADS. These graphs show amyloid quantitation on the y-axis and initial visual read on the x-axis. And the blue dots represent cases with negative or non-elevated visual reads and concordant non-elevated amyloid quantitation. The red dots represent cases with positive or elevated visual reads and concordant elevated amyloid quantitation. And the yellow dots represent cases with discordant visual read and quantitation, which required consensus visual review. Though there was only 5% discordance in the ADNI-4 cases that we've read thus far, 12% of amyloid PET scans were marked for consensus review, which commonly occurred in concordant cases with either the visual pattern of tracer uptake or the quantitation being considered borderline by the reader. In LEADS, there was 1% discordance, but 4% of scans were marked for consensus review. So overall, in ADNI-4 and LEADS, there was high concordance between visual read and quantitation, 95 to 99%. However, it's worth noting that both ADNI and LEADS are highly selective research cohorts with centralized visual reads performed by expert PET readers housed at a single academic center and quantitation calculated using state-of-the-art PET data and processing pipelines. Next slide. So as a contrast to ADNI-4 and LEADS, I briefly want to talk about the IDEA study, which collected amyloid PET scans acquired at over 300 PET facilities, interpreted by 525 visual readers for over 10,000 Medicare beneficiaries with clinical diagnoses of mild cognitive impairment or dementia of uncertain cause. In in this study, visual reads were performed by community radiologists, and these visual reads were highly concordant with centrally processed celluloid quantitation using our PET-only pipeline. Overall, the visual reads in the community and quantitation were concordant about 90% of the time. And we've seen this in other real-world clinical studies where there's about 90% concordance, and overall kappa values suggest substantial to almost perfect agreement between the visual read and the quantitation. And this overall supports the validity of amyloid PET visual read and the use of quantitation in real-world clinical settings. Next slide. I want to talk about our calibration process, but before I do that, I want to maybe compare and contrast CLARiTI to some of these other studies that I've mentioned, which I think will provide some context for the importance of calibration. So in CLARiTI, amyloid PET and other scans will be acquired at 37 different ADRC sites and visually interpreted right now by a pool of 10 expert readers, but that can grow. And these expert readers are located right now across 8 different ADRC sites. So this is a larger pool of amyloid PET readers than ADNI-4 and leads, though not as large as in IDEAs. Additionally, unlike ADNI-4 and leads, the PET readers are spread across multiple centers and will use their preferred software and hardware, which will provide some ecological validity that brings the CLARiTI PET visual read process a little closer to what is done in real-world clinical practice. But given the use of expert readers, centralized quantitation, and the characteristics of the potential participants in the study, concordance between visual read and quantitation will probably be at least 90%. So in addition to high quality visual reads, achieving high concordance with quantitation, the quality and reliability of visual reads is especially important for adjudicating discordant scans and those with borderline visual reader quantitation. So given the number of readers, the size and scope of the visual read endeavor, and the critical importance of providing reliable amyloid PET reads back, all readers will participate in this calibration process that will also facilitate assessment of inter and intra-rater reliability. So the calibration will be done before any participant amyloid PET scans are read. So this calibration will require each reader to perform a blinded and independent visual interpretation for 180 amyloid PET scans, and they'll receive feedback on the reads after all the reads are completed. This set of scans consists of 30 amyloid PET scans for each of the 4 amyloid PET tracers, as well as 15 randomly selected and duplicated scans per tracer. The duplicated scans are necessary for the assessment of the intra-rater reliability. These 45 scans per tracer will be randomly renamed and sorted, and all scans require manual scaling, so all of this should limit recognition of duplicate scans. Scan selection was balanced to include an even mix of visually non-elevated and elevated scans, with their celluloid quantitation spanning a range from -20 to 120 celluloids, so the full celluloid range. 15% of scans for each tracer were chosen so that they are challenging visually borderline scans, which is a similar proportion to the number of challenging scans requiring consensus review in ADNI-4. And overall, we expect to see 80% or higher agreement and kappa values of 0.7 corresponding with substantial to nearly perfect agreement for both inter and intra-rater reliability. We're especially interested, if we can go back, we're especially interested in assessing the intra-rater reliability for borderline cases, which will give us an idea of how these types of cases will be adjudicated in consensus review. These calibration reads will be done through Flywheel, which is the same platform they'll be used to facilitate all CLARiTI visual reads. And this calibration will be done in September with the goal of getting all readers prepared to provide amyloid PET reads in October, around the same time that scans should become available to read for the first CLARiTI participants. Next slide. So the visual read process will be done through Flywheel, which is a secure platform for coordinating radiological reads across multiple readers located at different sites. This is the Flywheel interface for the visual read case report form. Flywheel provides a visual overview of the images on the left, but the reader will download and review the amyloid PET scan on the software and hardware of their choosing, and they'll document the read in the case report form displayed on the right. Next slide. So now we'll simulate the visual read process. Right now, one axial slice from the florbetapir scan assigned to the reader is shown in the thumbnail image on the right. In this case, the reader thought the scan did not show any tracer retention in the cortex and assigned a read of non-elevated. Next, they marked their visual read as complete, which triggered display of the quantitation, which was 2 centiloids, consistent with a non-elevated scan. Given the concordance of the visual read and quantitation, they finalized the read as non-elevated. Okay, so now we'll review the process for discordant visual read and quantitation. In this case, the initial blinded visual read was documented as non-elevated, and after the reader marked the visual read as complete, the centiloid quantitation was displayed. Given that 50 centiloids is in the elevated range for florbetapir, the reader marked that consensus review was needed because of incongruency between the initial visual read and quantitation. Although this was a discordant read requiring consensus review, please note again that a reader can also opt for consensus review for borderline scans, poor quality scans, difficult to read scans, or other scenarios where a consensus review by experts could be helpful. Next slide. So returning back to our case, consensus review was done by 3 readers. The idea of the 3 readers was marked. And I want to highlight again that 3 or more readers will be present for each of these consensus reviews. So in our case, the 3 readers saw elevated cortical tracer uptake, and their consensus was that the scan was elevated, consistent with the quantitation. So then they documented their interpretation, and after that was done, finalized their read. So the results of this visual read will be returned through the NACC ADRC portal. These results include all the information contained in the visual read case report form, a final summary visual read, elevated or non-elevated, PET-only centiloid quantitation for the scan, and multi-slice images of the participant scan. And again, it's very critical to mention this again. Please make sure to upload your amyloid PET scan and associated forms as soon as possible, because the 90-day countdown for returning the visual read doesn't start until this data is uploaded. Next slide. And here are examples of the multi-slice images that will be returned to sites as a 2-page PDF document. One page will show tracer-specific examples of non-elevated and elevated amyloid PET scans, which can be used as an educational tool or visual reference during disclosure. The other page will show multi-slice images of the participant's amyloid PET scan that are already appropriately scaled and presented in the tracer-specific color scale. So now I'll hand the talk back to Dr. Rabinovici, who will discuss tau PET.
Thanks, David. If I can figure out how to unmute and turn my camera on. There we are. Good. So as you know, in CLARiTI, we are also aspiring to return tau PET results to sites and participants. Now, this is a field that requires some more work compared to amyloid PET. There are currently 3 tau PET tracers included in CLARiTI: fluortaucipir, MK6240, and PI2620. And in returning the results, remember that tau, in the new Alzheimer's Association diagnostic criteria, tau PET is the primary biomarker that allows you to do biomarker staging of disease progression in people with Alzheimer's disease. And so on the bottom left, you see the table from Cliff Jack's criteria paper, where people who have a positive amyloid PET but no uptake on tau PET are deemed biomarker stage A. If tau PET uptake is limited to the medial temporal lobes, it's biomarker stage B. If it extends to the neocortex, but there's moderate uptake, that's biomarker stage C. And finally, high neocortical uptake is considered biomarker stage D. And so what we would like to do is provide you with tau PET results that will allow you to complete this biological staging in your ADRC participants who are in CLARiTI, if you so choose. And this will require some methods development. So on the right, you see the list of experts. Some are directly involved in CLARiTI or SCAN or ADNI. Probably everyone meets one of those criteria at least. But these are people who are very thoughtful about tau PET as well as amyloid PET and will help us develop the methodology to provide you with reliable results that you can then return to participants. Next slide. Just to remind you, there is only one FDA-approved tau PET tracer, that is fluortaucipir, marketed as Tauvid. And the FDA-approved method for reading the scans is actually a little different than what we want to do. So in the FDA-approved methodology, people whose tau PET uptake is limited to the medial temporal lobes are actually considered to be negative. And the criteria for an elevated or positive scan requires tracer uptake to extend into the posterior lateral temporal or occipital lobe, plus minus parietal, cingulate, and frontal areas. And so this was really designed to detect BRCA5/6 tangle pathology. We're hoping, again, to look at medial temporal lobes as well and potentially detect some earlier stage pathology in CLARiTI. Next slide. So there are a number of other visual interpretation methods that have been published. On the right, you see a publication from Ida Sani and the Berkeley group that included the possibility of classifying a scan as having medial temporal lobe only binding or a more complete Alzheimer's pattern with neocortical binding. On the left, you see a scheme that was developed by John Seibel and in vitro that looks at a different tau PET tracer, MK6240, visual interpretations, and allows for scans to be called positive, either typical or atypical AD, non-AD patterns. And importantly, this methodology does look at the hippocampus and the medial temporal lobe for MK6240 as regions to consider. So we're not starting completely from scratch. These are some of the published methods that allow perhaps to call earlier stages of tau PET uptake, and we'll be looking at these and others as we work through the work group. So I don't have a precise timeline for you, but just know that we are beginning to work on tau PET reads, and certainly at some point during the funding period, we hope to be able to provide your site with those results in addition to the amyloid PET results. And the ROAR core will help us develop also methodology for how to disclose those results in a way that is beneficial to our research participants. Next slide. So I think that's it. This is our email address for the PET visual read core and CLARiTI, maybe the overall PET core. So any questions that aren't addressed in the Q&A or that come up later, please go ahead and email us, and one of us will be happy to answer things. Over now, back to our fearless leaders, Sterling and Beth.
Thanks, Gil, David. Those were excellent presentations. So we're now going to open it up for questions. So feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to unmute yourself to ask a question. There was, maybe as we're waiting to see if anybody has a question, there was one question posted earlier, which I think has been addressed. So the question was, which consent do you use if you only return amyloid PET results, but not tau PET at this time? So as Gil reviewed, so tau PET disclosure isn't included in CLARiTI at this time. So the tau PET piece doesn't influence the consenting process. Now the only option with disclosure, if you're within CLARiTI, is the disclosure of amyloid PET information. All right, I see Rebecca has her hand up. Yeah, go ahead, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. This is very helpful. As I'm reaching out to members of my ADRC about your call for additional visual readers, I was curious if you could share what the time commitment is and if there's any effort or funding available for that.
Yeah, so I might actually punt that one to Aaron or Sterling to talk about the support and the scope of work for the individual readers. Would that be okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, Dr. Leckbing, we can follow up with you online. Thanks for your interest.
I think there may be some room to add more readers in terms of the funding for it.
The short answer is, you know, there's a limited number. I don't have the number off the top of my head that we anticipate based on the overall grants, and there is support available for doing that service. And I will let the admin core fill in the details and make sure that I get them right. And it is a bit of a moving target as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Gil. Yeah, I'll just say on that, that we haven't expended the money as fast as we want, and I think that we'll have a few options for adding readers to make sure that we have enough coverage for everything that we want to do. We want to support this, and because the faster we can get these reads to you, the better we can serve our participants, and so that's a real motivator for us all.
There's a couple more questions coming in. So from Heidi Roth, what software, hardware, PET viewing options are most common and popular? So I think that's a question for Gil and David.
I think we're going to find out. I think there's a little bit of a divide between neurology and radiology / nuclear medicine. I think the nuclear medicine folks tend to use some of the clinically approved software like MIM also to read research scans. I think people who are not in radiology often use some of the research viewers like Mango, for example, and there are others that are freely available. So we thought, and some may use Flywheel. Flywheel does have this functionality. So we're going to learn. We debated whether to mandate that everyone read the scans on the same software, and we ended up landing on this decision that everyone should use the software that they're most familiar and comfortable with. The key is just to only do that initial interpretation purely based on visual reads. Some of these viewers allow you to actually point at different areas, and you might get SUV or SUVR values. So our readers are not allowed to do that. The visual read really has to be fully independent of any quantitation for this methodology to be consistent and valid.
Thanks, Gil. So here's another question from Sally Dragarian. And I think this is a question maybe more for NACC and for Sterling and myself. Will there be a way for sites to follow their participant scans through the process, pre-proc QC, processing, visual read, report ready?
Yes, hi, I can take that question. This is Heather at NACC. So, yep, we are constructing a dashboard for CLARiTI that will be similar to the scan dashboard that would list the images and their statuses. So that is definitely in the works, and plan to share, be available for the sites. So also will be critical for the return of results process.
Yeah, and I think this is something, as this is being built, that'd be great to get feedback on from the sites. So as Gil emphasized, there's going to be a 90-day turnaround window. So I don't think sites should be expecting a very fast, immediate turnaround. But in general, the style, making sure sites know where to get this information, and also feedback on the reports themselves, I think will be helpful as these things are being built.
Yes, definitely.
I think that might be, are there any other, I think that's all the questions that I'm noticing. Should we move to the close, or are there any other comments from the audience?
Yeah, Zoe, do you mind removing your slide? Perfect, thank you. Lori or Phoebe, if you could put on the new slide deck. We've just got a couple more slides to go through here really quick. Just a few announcements. So we do have time for a CLARiTI session at the NACC Fall ADRC meeting. So that's going to be 4 p.m. Eastern time on October 17th. So that will be both in person and online. So if you're interested in joining, the Inclusion Core will have 30 minutes of that time as well. And then just some contact information there to get a hold of the administrative team, the regulatory team for CLARiTI, the inclusion team, and the link there for our website. And then lastly, we just have a QR code that will give you access to the slide deck and a PDF of the slides. And as is typical, in maybe a week or two, we'll get the recording for this webinar up on our website. And we'll announce that when we release the next CLARiTI Connect, which will be in a few weeks. Hannah put a link in the chat to register for the fall ADRC meeting as well. Thanks, Hannah. Last call for questions. Otherwise, we can finish early.
Aaron, I'll just take this chance to thank Gil and David and their team for putting this beautiful presentation together on how the visual reads will happen. It's so exciting what's happening in the ADRC system and the way that we're scaling up to support the centers and support multi-site projects within the center system. I also just wanted to say, I know we kind of went quickly over some of that front matter around site logistics and startup, those site initiation visits. We need your feedback on how those go, and we'll be able to use that feedback to shorten the length of those visits. If you have questions about the site initiation visits or about the version 3 of the protocol and consent, or any concerns or suggestions for us, we would love your feedback. And a big thanks to NACC for setting up this meeting today.